The first light of dawn crept over the abandoned quarry, painting the Texas sky in shades of amber and blood. A thin mist clung to the ground, swirling around the motionless body of a bounty hunter sprawled across the rocks. 10 feet away, Skylar Hayes stood frozen, her oversized cowboy hat casting a shadow over her wide eyes. The pistol in her small hand still smoked, its barrel aimed at the space the man had occupied moments before. Beside her, Ezra Swift Arrow towered like a wounded oak, his broad chest heaving beneath the blood-stained bandage. The Apache warrior's obsidian eyes shifted from the dead man to the child. Disbelief etched across his weathered face. "We bye," he whispered, his deep voice barely audible above the morning breeze. "Why would you kill for me?" Skylar's hand trembled as she lowered the gun. A single tear carved a path through the dirt on her cheek. "I couldn't let you die," she said, her voice small, yet resolute. "Mama wouldn't forgive me if I did." The morning birds began their chorus as pre-dawn silence gave way to the soft rustling of the Texas wilderness. Skylar looked up at Ezra, her eyes far older than her 10 years should allow. "I never wanted any of this," she whispered. 3 days earlier, moonlight sliced through the ancient oaks of Serpent's Hollow, casting skeletal shadows across the forest floor. The night was unnaturally still, as if the wilderness itself were holding its breath. From a gnarled branch, a rattlesnake observed with cold, unblinking eyes, as blood dripped steadily onto the parched earth below. Ezra Swift Arrow hung from the great oak, his powerful wrists raw and bleeding beneath the coarse ropes that bound him. Once standing tall as the proudest warrior of his people, he now dangled like slaughtered game, waiting for death to claim him. The deep gash across his chest had slowed its bleeding, but the pain remained, a constant, throbbing reminder of his failure. Each labored breath sent waves of agony through his body, yet Ezra welcomed the pain. Physical suffering was a merciful distraction from the hollow ache that had consumed his soul for 3 long years. Since that blood-soaked dawn when soldiers had descended upon his village, since he had found his wife, Nara's body cradling their small daughter Luna, both still and silent amidst the flames. The rattlesnake slithered closer along the branch, its tongue flicking out to taste the copper scent of blood. Ezra watched it without fear. The Apache believed that death came in many forms, sometimes as a snake, sometimes as an enemy's bullet. It mattered little which messenger collected his final breath. "Come," he whispered in his native tongue. "I am ready to join my family." The snake coiled, its rattle creating a soft warning in the night air, but death did not come from its fangs. Instead, a small figure emerged from the shadows beneath the tree. A child. A girl no more than 10 years old, dressed in a tattered black and white dress with an oversized brown vest hanging loosely from her narrow shoulders. An old cowboy hat sat atop her head, too large for her small frame, shadowing eyes that gleamed with determination in the moonlight. Her hands, covered in worn leather gloves, clutched a small knife with a nicked but sharp blade. Ezra watched through swollen eyes as the girl assessed the situation. Her gaze moved from his bound wrist to the snake on the branch, then back to him. Without a word, she placed a foot on the tree's rough trunk and began to climb. Her movements were deliberate, careful. Each scrape of her boots against bark sounded thunderous in the silent forest. The snake's rattle intensified as she drew closer, a warning that sent no visible fear through the child. "Go," Ezra rasped in English. "Leave me to die." The girl paused, her small face tilted up toward him. Then, to his astonishment, she spoke in broken Apache. "No dying today," she said, the words awkwardly formed but understandable. Ezra's eyes widened. "How does a white child speak the tongue of my people?" "Mama taught me," she replied, switching to English as she continued her climb. "She said to understand someone, you must speak their words." She reached the branch where the rattlesnake waited. For a moment, girl and serpent regarded each other, a silent negotiation in the pale moonlight. Then, with surprising speed, she swung herself around the branch, avoiding the snake, while positioning herself near Ezra's bound hands. Her knife began sawing at the thick rope, each stroke revealing the effort it cost her small arms. Blood from Ezra's wrist smeared her gloved fingers, warm and slick. "My name is Skylar," she said between breaths, never pausing in her work. "Skylar Hayes." Ezra said nothing, watching this strange child risk herself for a man she did not know, a man her people would call enemy. When one hand came free, Ezra's arm dropped heavily, nearly pulling Skylar from her perch. She steadied herself and continued cutting the second rope. The snake inched closer, its patience waning. "Don't give up," Skylar whispered, more to herself than to him. "Too many people give up." The moonlight filtered through the leaves above, dappling across both their faces. In that moment, suspended between earth and sky, their eyes met. A warrior who had lost his will to live, and a child with determination beyond her years. "I know what it's like to lose everything," she said softly. "But you still have a choice to live." Something stirred in Ezra's chest. Not hope, not yet, but perhaps its distant cousin. "Why would you help me? Why would you care if I die?" Skylar's knife paused. "They said I was bait, that I should lead you here and leave." Her voice dropped lower. "But I couldn't do it. Not when I saw what they did to you." Before Ezra could respond, a dry laugh cut through the night air. "Well, ain't this touching?" Skylar froze, her knife still against the rope. From the shadows emerged a boy of 15, dressed in an oversized leather coat that hung to his knees. His face, illuminated by moonlight, held the cold calculation of someone far older. A revolver dangled carelessly from his right hand. "Vernon," Skylar breathed, fear finally cracking her brave facade. The boy, Vernon, stepped closer, his boots crushing the fallen leaves beneath. "Traitorous little cousin," he spat. "Judge Cole's gonna be mighty disappointed when he hears his niece is helping an Apache." Judge Cole. The name sent a surge of hatred through Ezra's weary body, stronger than any he had felt in years. Randall Cole, the man who had ordered the raid on his village. The man responsible for the deaths of his wife and child. Vernon's gaze shifted to Ezra, disgust evident in his young eyes. "This savage killed 3 good men before we caught him. And you're cutting him loose?" He raised his gun toward Skylar. "Step away from him." "Now." Skylar's hands trembled, but her voice remained steady. "What you're doing is wrong, Vernon. What the judge is doing is wrong." "Wrong?" Vernon laughed again, the sound hollow and cruel. "What's wrong is you betraying your own kind, your own blood." His face hardened. "The judge took you in when your folks died. This is how you repay him? By freeing the animal who's been raiding our settlements?" "He hasn't raided anything." Skylar's voice rose, echoing through the trees. "The judge is lying. He always lies." Vernon's finger tightened on the trigger. "Last chance, cousin. Step away, or I'll shoot you both." In the branch above, the rattlesnake finally struck, lunging at the disturbance below. Vernon fired reflexively, the bullet missing the snake but splintering bark inches from Skylar's head. She flinched but didn't scream. Instead, with one decisive movement, she sliced through the remaining rope. Ezra plummeted to the ground, landing with a heavy thud that drove the air from his lungs. Pain exploded through his injured chest, but with it came a surge of clarity. He was free. Vernon shouted in alarm, swinging his gun toward Ezra's fallen form. But Skylar moved faster, throwing her knife with surprising accuracy. The blade struck Vernon's hand, drawing a thin line of blood across his knuckles. He yelped, dropping the gun. "Run!" Skylar scrambled down the tree, nearly falling in her haste. Ezra forced himself to his feet, every muscle screaming in protest. 3 days hanging from that tree had left him weak, but the warrior's instinct for survival ran deep. He snatched up a rock from the ground as Vernon lunged for his fallen weapon. With strength born of desperation, Ezra hurled the rock, striking the boy's temple. Vernon staggered, dazed but not unconscious. "They're coming!" Vernon shouted into the night. "Over here! The girl's freeing him!" Distant shouts answered, along with the baying of hounds. The hunters were close. Skylar grabbed Ezra's arm, her small hand barely spanning his wrist. "This way," she urged, pulling him toward the dense underbrush. "Crimson Creek is just beyond those trees. We can lose them in the water." Ezra hesitated. The girl was risking everything for him, a stranger, an enemy in the eyes of her people. "Why?" he asked again, even as he stumbled after her. "Why betray your own for me?" Skylar's face, half hidden beneath her oversized hat, turned briefly toward him. "Because they're the real savages," she answered, her young voice hard with conviction. "And because Mama would want me to help you." Together they plunged into the tangled brush, thorns tearing at their clothes and skin as they fled into the Texas night, the howls of dogs drawing ever closer behind them. Crimson Creek earned its name from the reddish clay that lined its banks, staining the clear water with a rusty hue that made it appear as if the earth itself were bleeding. Schuyler led Ezra into the shallow stream, the cold water shocking his overheated skin as it swirled around his ankles. "The water will hide our scent from the boy," she explained, carefully picking her way across slippery stones. Despite his weakened state, Ezra moved with the natural grace of one born to the wilderness. His body might be failing him, but his senses remained sharp. He listened for pursuers while guiding Schuyler across the treacherous creek bed, steadying her when her small boots slipped on moss-covered rocks. "You know much for a child," he observed, his voice rough from thirst and pain. Schuyler kept her eyes on the path ahead. "Papa, my adopted papa, taught me how to track and hide before he died. He said knowledge keeps you alive when luck runs out." They followed the creek for nearly a mile, the water gradually deepening until it reached Schuyler's waist. The child never complained, though her teeth chattered from the cold. Ezra's wound had begun bleeding again, a thin trail of crimson mingling with the rusty water behind them. When they reached a cluster of boulders that formed a natural alcove, Ezra guided Schuyler toward it. "Rest," he commanded, helping her onto the dry stone. "The dogs will lose our trail in the water." Schuyler collapsed onto the rock, her soaked dress clinging to her small frame. In the fading moonlight, she looked impossibly fragile. Yet there was steel in her eyes when she looked up at him. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "I led you into a trap. The judge, he has my mother at Redemption Ridge. He said if I helped find you, he'd let her go." Shame colored her voice. "But when I saw you hanging there, when I heard what Vernon said they'd do to you—" Ezra studied the child, feeling something stir within his numbed heart. "Who is your mother that the judge holds her prisoner?" "Catherine Hayes," Schuyler answered, wringing water from her dress. "She was a nurse at the fort before I was born. She helped Apache people who were hurt. The judge says that makes her a traitor." Ezra's mind raced through memories of the fort, of white faces that had shown kindness among the cruelty. "A nurse with red hair?" he asked, a half-remembered face surfacing in his mind. Schuyler nodded eagerly. "Yes, her hair is like fire. Do you know her?" Before Ezra could answer, the distant baying of hounds rose above the creek's gentle murmur. Closer now. Too close. "We must move," he said, helping Schuyler to her feet. "Tell me about this judge as we go." They continued downstream, keeping to the water. Schuyler spoke in hushed tones, the story spilling from her like a long-held poison finally released. "Judge Randall Cole is my mother's brother-in-law. He married her sister, but she died years ago. He's the law in 3 counties and owns half the land. People fear him." Schuyler's voice hardened. "Last year there was a fire at our homestead. Papa, my adopted father, died. The judge said it was Apache raiders, but Mama told me it was his men who set the fire to take our land." Ezra's jaw tightened. "This judge, he has ordered attacks on my people many times. 3 years ago, he commanded soldiers to burn my village." His voice grew distant. "My wife, my daughter, I found them in our burning home." Schuyler stopped, turning to face him fully. "I'm sorry," she said with the simple, devastating sincerity only a child could offer. "Did they have names?" The question caught Ezra off guard. White men rarely asked for the names of those they killed. "Nara," he said softly. "My wife was Nara. My daughter was Luna. She was 5. Schuyler nodded solemnly, as if committing the names to memory. "I'll remember them," she promised. The moment was broken by the sound of hoofbeats approaching along the creek's edge. Both froze, searching the darkness for escape routes. The brush was too thick to run through silently, and the creek offered no cover. "Stay behind me," Ezra whispered, positioning himself between Schuyler and the approaching rider. The horse emerged from the misty darkness, its rider a silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. A tall man with a rifle held ready, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. A long coat, worn and weathered, hung from broad shoulders marked by the bearing of a soldier. Schuyler gasped. "Uncle Gabe?" The rider reined his horse to a stop, rifle still aimed. "Schuyler?" His voice was gravel and smoke, disbelief evident in its rough edges. "They said you were dead in the attack." "Uncle Gabe!" Schuyler splashed through the water toward him, relief breaking across her face like sunrise. Ezra tensed, ready to pull her back. But the man, Gabe, was already dismounting, rifle lowered as he dropped to one knee in the creek bed. Skylar threw herself into his arms, the first truly childlike gesture Ezra had seen from her. "I thought you died in the fire with Papa," she sobbed into the man's shoulder. "Nearly did," Gabe answered, his voice thick with emotion. Over Skylar's head, his eyes met Ezra's, wary, assessing. One side of his face bore a massive burn scar, twisting from jaw to temple. "Who's your friend?" he asked, one hand moving subtly back toward his weapon. Skylar turned, wiping tears from her face. "This is Ezra. He's Apache. The judge was going to kill him, but I helped him escape." She looked between the two men, sensing the tension. "He won't hurt us, Uncle Gabe. I promise, Dihayi." Gabe rose slowly, keeping Skylar half behind him as he faced Ezra. "An Apache warrior traveling with my niece." His voice held no accusation, merely stated fact. "That's not something you see every day." "The child freed me when her people would have left me to die," Ezra replied evenly. "I owe her a life debt." Gabe studied him for a long moment. The sound of hounds grew louder, no longer following the creek but spreading out through the forest as the trackers lost the scent. "We don't have time for this," Gabe finally said. "Those dogs will pick up our trail soon enough." "Can you ride?" Ezra nodded once. "Then let's go. I've got a horse hidden half a mile downstream." As they moved through the creek, Skylar between the two men, Ezra noticed how Gabe kept his body between them, his hand never far from his weapon. The wariness was mutual. Ezra recognized the bearing of a bluecoat, a soldier, in the way Gabe moved, the very kind of man who had helped destroy his village. "Your uncle," Ezra said quietly to Skylar. "He was a soldier." Gabe's shoulders stiffened, but he didn't turn. "Was," he confirmed. "Not anymore." "He was at Fort Defiance," Skylar added. "That's where he met Papa, my adopted father. They were like brothers." Ezra's eyes narrowed. Fort Defiance had been where captured Apache were held before execution or relocation. Many of his people had died within its walls. "Your father was also a soldier?" Ezra asked, the question directed at Skylar, but his eyes on Gabe's back. "A doctor," Gabe answered instead. "Treated everyone the same, soldier, settler, or Apache. The army didn't much care for his even-handedness." A bitterness edged his words. "Thomas Hayes was a good man, better than most. He took me in when I was 5, Skylar explained. My real papa died before I was born, or that's what Mama told me." They reached a small clearing where a chestnut mare was tethered to a low-hanging branch. Gabe lifted Skylar onto the saddle, then turned to Ezra. "We need to get to higher ground," he said, eyeing Ezra's bloodied chest. "You need tending, and we need a vantage point to see what we're up against." "The judge's men are everywhere," Skylar warned. "They caught Mama 3 days ago. That's when Vernon, my cousin, told me I had to help them find Ezra or they'd hurt her." A shadow passed over Gabe's scarred face. "Catherine's alive? Where are they holding her?" "Redemption Ridge," Skylar answered. "In the old mining office. Vernon said she'd be safe as long as I helped them." Gabe's jaw tightened. "And you believed him?" Skylar looked down, shame coloring her cheeks. "I didn't know what else to do." Ezra watched this exchange with growing suspicion. There was more between these two than mere uncle and niece, a tension that spoke of deeper histories and shared secrets. "We should move," Ezra interrupted. "The hunters draw closer." Gabe nodded, helping Ezra onto the horse behind Skylar. As Ezra settled onto the mare's back, he noticed Gabe's eyes lingering on the leather gloves Skylar wore. "Where did you get those?" Gabe asked, his voice suddenly tense. Skylar glanced down at her hands. "Mama gave them to me before the judge took her. She said they were special." Something unreadable flashed across Gabe's face. He said nothing more but mounted behind Ezra, nudging the horse forward through the underbrush. They rode in silence, the only sounds the soft thud of hooves on forest floor and the increasingly distant baying of hounds. As dawn approached, they emerged from the forest into a vast valley where wild mustangs grazed in the misty half-light. Gabe guided the horse toward a ridge overlooking the valley, where a cluster of wind-twisted junipers offered concealment. "We'll rest here," he announced, dismounting. "Horse needs a breather, and I need to look at that wound." Ezra slid from the saddle, his body protesting every movement. The brief ride had reopened his chest wound, fresh blood seeping through his tattered shirt. Skylar scrambled down after him, her concerned eyes taking in his weakened state. "I'll get water," she offered, taking a canteen from Gabe's saddlebag. As soon as she was out of earshot, Gabe turned to Ezra, all pretense of casual acquaintance gone. "I know who you are," he said quietly. "Ezra Swift Arrow, one of the few warriors who escaped the massacre at Red River Bend." Ezra's hand instinctively went to his side where a knife would normally be sheathed. Finding nothing, he straightened to his full height, ignoring the pain that radiated through his chest. "And I know what you are, Gitrum," he replied coldly. "A bluecoat, one of those who slaughtered my people." Gabe didn't flinch from the accusation. "I was there," he admitted, his voice low and grave. "But not as you think." Before Ezra could respond, Skylar returned with the filled canteen. She looked between the two men, sensing the tension that crackled like lightning before a storm. "Are you fighting?" she asked, her young voice cutting through their standoff. Gabe took the canteen from her, his scarred face softening. "No, little fox, just getting acquainted." He knelt beside his saddlebag, retrieving a small medicine kit. "Your friend needs tending. Help me clean his wound." As Skylar assisted, Gabe cleaned the deep gash across Ezra's chest with practiced hands. His touch was firm but gentle, the movements of someone familiar with battlefield medicine. "The cut is clean," he assessed. "No infection yet, which is a miracle after hanging in that tree for days." Ezra watched the man's hands, the same hands that might have once held a rifle aimed at his people. "Why do you help me? I am your enemy." Gabe's eyes, gray as storm clouds, met his. "My enemies are men who harm the innocent, Judge Cole and his kind." He finished bandaging the wound. "Besides, my niece seems to have decided you're worth saving. I've learned to trust her judgment." Skylar beamed at this rare praise, but her smile faltered as she looked toward the valley below. "Uncle Gabe, what happened to Papa? The judge said Apache raiders burned our house, but Mama said it was the judge's men." A muscle worked in Gabe's jaw. "Your mama was right. Thomas died because of Randall Cole, not because of any Apache." He glanced at Ezra. "Cole has been stirring hatred against the Apache for years, blaming them for raids his own men carry out." "Why?" Skylar asked. "Why would he do that?" "Land," Gabe answered simply. "The treaty protected Apache hunting grounds. If settlers believed Apache were raiding them, they'd demand the army clear them out. Once the Apache are gone, the judge gets the land," Skylar finished, understanding dawning in her young eyes. Ezra listened to this exchange with growing unease. The story was too familiar. White men's greed disguised as justice, treaties made only to be broken. Yet something didn't align. This man, this former soldier, spoke against his own kind with the conviction of personal loss. "Your brother," Ezra said, the pieces beginning to fit together. "The doctor, he opposed this judge?" Gabe nodded, grief briefly visible beneath his hardened exterior. "Thomas discovered Cole was behind the raids, was gathering evidence to send to the governor." His voice roughened. "The fire wasn't meant to kill him, just destroy his records. But Thomas wouldn't leave his home." Skylar's eyes welled with tears. "He went back for Mama's pictures," she whispered. "I saw him go back inside." The three fell silent, each lost in private thoughts as the sun crested the distant hills, bathing the valley in golden light. Below, the wild mustangs continued their peaceful grazing, oblivious to the human drama unfolding above them. Ezra studied the child who had saved him and the scarred man who had once been his enemy. The world had never seemed so strange, or the lines between friend and foe so blurred. "We need fresh horses," Gabe finally said, breaking the silence. "This one won't carry three much farther." He nodded toward the mustangs. "I'm decent with a lasso, but—" "I can call them," Ezra offered, surprising himself. It had been years since he had tamed a wild horse, years since he had felt the desire to demonstrate his people's skills to a white man. Gabe raised an eyebrow. "Call them?" Ezra stood, ignoring the protest of his injured body. "The Apache do not capture horses. We ask them to join us." Skylar's eyes widened with interest. "Can I watch?" A ghost of a smile crossed Ezra's weathered face. "You may learn." They descended to the valley floor, keeping to the tree line to avoid startling the herd. Ezra moved with increasing steadiness, as if proximity to the wild horses restored something vital within him. He instructed Skylar and Gabe to remain at a distance While he approached the edge of the herd, a magnificent black stallion raised its head, nostrils flaring at Ezra's scent. The warrior stopped, standing perfectly still. Then softly he began to speak in Apache, the ancient words his father had taught him for calling to the spirit of the horse. The stallion's ears pricked forward. Ezra continued his gentle chant, extending one hand, palm up. Slowly, cautiously, the horse approached, drawn by the strange two-legged creature who spoke with the voice of wind and earth. "He's doing it," Skylar whispered in awe. "The horse is coming to him." Gabe watched, his expression caught between disbelief and grudging respect. "I've never seen anything like it." The stallion was now mere feet from Ezra, its dark eyes reflecting the rising sun as it considered the man before it. Ezra reached out, his fingers almost brushing the horse's muzzle. The crack of a rifle shattered the moment. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from Ezra's feet. The stallion reared, whinnying in fear, as the rest of the herd scattered across the valley. "There they are," a voice shouted. "I found them." On the ridge they had just vacated, 5 riders appeared, rifles raised. At their center, sitting tall on a palomino, was a man whose very posture spoke of authority and cruelty. Judge Randall Cole had found them. "Run!" Gabe shouted, drawing his revolver and firing at the riders. "Get to the trees!" Ezra sprinted toward Skylar, his wound forgotten in the rush of danger. The black stallion, instead of fleeing with its herd, charged toward them, as if answering Ezra's earlier call. Without hesitation, Ezra grabbed the horse's mane and swung himself onto its bare back, then reached down for Skylar. "Take my hand," he commanded. Skylar grasped his outstretched arm, and with one powerful motion, Ezra pulled her up in front of him. The stallion needed no urging, already racing toward the safety of the forest as bullets whined past them. Gabe mounted his own horse, providing covering fire as he followed them into the trees. A bullet clipped his left arm, drawing a pained grunt but not slowing his pursuit. They plunged into the dense forest, the horses navigating the tangled undergrowth with the sure-footedness of their wild heritage. Behind them, Cole's shouts echoed through the valley. "Find them! $100 to the man who brings me the Apache's head!" They rode hard for an hour, taking every fork in the path that offered greater concealment, crossing streams to break their trail. When they finally stopped in a secluded canyon, all 3 were breathless, the horses lathered with sweat. Gabe dismounted, grimacing as he examined his wounded arm. "Just a graze," he assessed, tearing a strip from his shirt to bind it. "Cole's not going to give up. He's got too much at stake." Skylar slid from the stallion's back, her small legs wobbling after the hard ride. "What do we do now? They'll keep hunting us." Ezra remained mounted, his eyes scanning the canyon walls for signs of pursuit. The black stallion beneath him stood calmly, as if they had been partners for years rather than minutes. "We need shelter," he said. "Somewhere defensible, where we can rest." Gabe nodded toward the deepening canyon. "There's an old line shack about 5 miles ahead. Used it during roundups years ago." He glanced at Ezra. "It's not much, but the walls are solid." As they prepared to continue, Skylar noticed something glinting at Gabe's neck, a silver chain partially hidden by his collar. Her eyes widened in recognition. "Uncle Gabe," she said slowly, "where did you get that necklace?" Gabe's hand instinctively went to his throat, tucking the chain further out of sight. "It's nothing, just an old keepsake." But Skylar was already reaching beneath her vest, pulling out a small leather pouch suspended from a cord around her neck. "Mama gave me this before the judge took her." She opened the pouch, revealing a silver pendant identical to the one Gabe wore, a crescent moon cradling a small star. "She said it belonged to my real father," Skylar continued, her voice rising with emotion. "That he was a brave man who saved many lives." Gabe stood frozen, his face ashen beneath his scar. Ezra looked between them, understanding dawning in his dark eyes. "You're not her uncle," he said quietly. "You're her father." The canyon fell silent, save for the soft nickering of the horses and the distant cry of a hawk. Gabe's shoulders slumped, as if a great weight had finally settled fully upon them. "Catherine was going to tell you when you were older," he said to Skylar, his voice rough with emotion. "We agreed it was safer that way." Skylar stared at him, her young mind struggling to process this revelation. "But Why? Why did you leave us? Why did you let me think you were just my uncle? Gabe knelt before her, his weathered hands gentle as they covered hers. Because I've done terrible things, little fox. Things I didn't want to touch your life. He swallowed hard. And because men like Cole would use you to get to me if they knew the truth. Ezra watched this exchange with growing unease. He had thought he understood this man, a former soldier with regrets. But now he sensed deeper currents, darker histories. What things? Ezra asked, his voice cold as steel. What have you done that makes a judge hunt you like an animal? Gabe rose, facing Ezra with the resignation of a man long haunted by his past. I helped prisoners escape from Fort Defiance, he said. Apache prisoners, women and children who would have been executed or sent to the reservation to die slowly. Ezra's breath caught. 3 years ago, after the massacre, rumors had spread of an army officer who had helped survivors escape, who had guided them to safety beyond the territories. Few believed such stories. White men did not risk themselves for Apache lives. You? Ezra's disbelief was evident. A bluecoat who helped my people? Not all soldiers believe in slaughtering innocents, Gabe replied, a flash of anger breaking through his composed exterior. Some of us remember what honor means. Uncle Gabe, father, Skylar corrected herself, the word strange on her tongue. Did you know Ezra before? Is that why you're helping him? Gabe shook his head. We've never met, but I know of him. His reputation as a warrior is well known. He glanced at Ezra, and I know he lost his family in Cole's raid. Something shifted in Ezra's expression, a flicker of the pain he had carried for 3 long years. You were there, he said, not a question, but an accusation. At Red River Bend, when they burned my home. I was, Gabe admitted, not looking away. I couldn't stop it. Cole had the colonel in his pocket, and the orders came from above. By the time I reached your village, the fires had already started. Ezra's hands tightened on the stallion's mane, old rage rising like bile in his throat. I found my wife and daughter in our burning home. Their bodies, his voice broke. Did you see them? Did you watch them die? Gabe's eyes held steady, even as guilt shadowed his face. No, he answered quietly. I wasn't there for that. The tension between them was palpable. Years of hatred and grief condensed into the space between 2 men who should have been enemies, but now found themselves reluctant allies. Skylar moved between them, her small presence somehow diminishing the looming conflict. We need to help Mama, she reminded them. The judge still has her. Her words broke the standoff. Whatever reckoning lay between Ezra and Gabe would have to wait. The girl is right, Ezra conceded, his voice still hard but controlled. Your woman, Catherine, she is in danger while we stand here speaking of the past. Gabe nodded, the gratitude in his eyes tempered by the knowledge that this truce was fragile at best. Let's get to the line shack. We can plan our next move there. As they prepared to mount, a new sound reached them, the rhythmic drumming of multiple horses approaching from the canyon entrance. Cole's men had found their trail. Gabe shouted, leaping onto his horse. Head for the narrow pass. Ezra pulled Skylar onto the stallion, spurring the powerful animal forward, just as the first riders appeared at the canyon's mouth. Bullets whined overhead as they galloped toward the jagged passage that cut through the far wall, a natural bottleneck that might slow their pursuers. The black stallion, responding to Ezra's guidance, surged ahead, its powerful legs eating up the distance. Gabe followed close behind, firing back at the riders to buy them precious seconds. As they neared the pass, a lone rider cut across their path. Vernon Cole, his young face twisted with rage and determination. The boy raised his revolver, aiming directly at Skylar. Traitor, he screamed, finger tightening on the trigger. Everything slowed. Ezra saw the gun barrel tracking his young companion, saw the hatred in Vernon's eyes. Without conscious thought, he threw himself forward, shielding Skylar with his body as the shot rang out. The bullet struck his shoulder, a fresh burst of pain joining the chorus of his existing wounds. But Ezra didn't falter. With one powerful arm, he swept Vernon from his saddle as they thundered past, sending the boy tumbling to the rocky ground. They reached the narrow pass, the horse's hooves striking sparks from stone as they navigated the treacherous path. Behind them, Cole's men hesitated at the entrance, reluctant to follow into such confined space where they would make easy targets. Skylar twisted in the saddle, her face pale with concern. "You're hit," she gasped, seeing the fresh blood staining Ezra's shirt. "It is nothing," he grunted, though the fire in his shoulders suggested otherwise. "Keep riding." They emerged from the pass into a small box canyon, its walls rising steep on three sides. The line shack Gabe had mentioned stood at the far end, a weathered structure of rough-hewn logs and a tin roof that had seen decades of harsh Texas seasons. They dismounted near the cabin, Gabe quickly checking the perimeter while Ezra helped Skylar down. The child's eyes were wide with fear and concern, her gloved hands reaching toward his bleeding shoulder. "Let me help," she pleaded. "Mama showed me how to treat wounds." Despite the pain and the danger still pursuing them, Ezra felt something warm unfurl within his chest. Something he had thought died with Nara and Luna 3 years ago. This child, this daughter of his enemy, had awakened it with her courage and compassion. "You have already helped me more than you know, little one," he said softly. Gabe returned, gesturing them inside the cabin. "It's secure. We can hold them off from here if they come through the pass." He eyed Ezra's new wound. "Let's get you patched up, again." As they entered the simple shelter, Skylar between them, Ezra found himself wondering at the strange turns of fate that had brought him here. 3 days ago, he had been ready to die, to join his lost family in whatever lay beyond this world of pain and betrayal. Now, against all expectation, he found himself fighting to live, for the sake of a child who had cut him free, for the chance to confront the man who had destroyed his world. And perhaps, though he scarcely dared acknowledge it, for the faint possibility that somewhere beyond these blood-soaked hills, a future might still await him. The cabin door closed behind them, sealing out the gathering twilight. Inside, as Gabe lit a lantern and Skylar prepared bandages from torn cloth, Ezra allowed himself a moment of bitter truth. His journey with these unlikely companions had only just begun, and the hardest paths still lay ahead. Outside, the black stallion stood vigil, its wild spirit somehow tamed by the greater wildness of human conflict. And in the distance, Judge Randall Cole gathered his forces, his cold determination undiminished by the day's setbacks. The hunt continued, and night was falling across the Texas wilderness. The line shack's interior smelled of dust and abandonment, the air thick with memories of cowboys long gone. A single room with a stone fireplace, rough-hewn table, and two rickety cots, sparse shelter against the growing storm of pursuit. Gabe secured the door with a wooden bar, while Ezra checked the cabin's only window, a small square of glass clouded by years of Texas dust and sun. "They won't try the pass until morning," Gabe said, setting the lantern on the table. Its flame cast grotesque shadows across the walls, making the small space seem alive with dancing spirits. "Even Cole's not fool enough to navigate that death trap in darkness." Skylar had already begun tearing strips from a relatively clean blanket she'd found on one of the cots. Her small hands worked with practiced efficiency, preparing bandages for Ezra's new wound. The gloves she wore, her mother's gloves, made the task awkward, but she refused to remove them. "Sit," she instructed Ezra, her young voice carrying the authority of her mother's medical training. "I need to see how bad it is." The Apache warrior settled onto a three-legged stool, his dark eyes never leaving the window. Even wounded, he maintained the vigilance of a man who had survived by anticipating danger. His shoulder throbbed where Vernon's bullet had grazed him, a hot line of fire across muscle and sinew. "It passed through," Ezra noted as Skylar helped him remove his tattered shirt. "The bleeding slows already." Gabe watched from across the room, checking his revolver by the lantern's light. 5 bullets remained, not enough for the fight that surely awaited them. His eyes moved from the gun to his newly discovered daughter, to the Apache warrior she was tending. 3 days ago, Ezra's swift arrow had been his enemy. 3 days ago, Skylar had known nothing of her true parentage. 3 days ago, Catherine had been safe. The world could change completely in 3 days. Gabe knew this better than most. "The judge will have men watching both ends of the canyon by now," he said, breaking the tense silence. "We're boxed in." Skylar glanced up from her ministrations, fear flashing briefly across her face before resolute determination took its place. "Then we need a new plan." Ezra allowed himself a small smile at the child's courage. "The little one speaks wisely," he agreed. "Tell us about this Redemption Ridge where they hold your mother." Gabe moved to the table, brushing dust from its surface before spreading out a worn map he retrieved from his saddlebag. It's an old mining settlement about 20 miles east, he explained, tracing the route with his finger. Mostly abandoned now, except for Cole's men and a few miners too stubborn to leave when the silver ran out. Skylar leaned closer, her bandaging momentarily forgotten. That's where the judge keeps his prisoners, she added. Mama said he uses the old mining office. Guarded? Ezra asked, wincing slightly, as Skylar resumed cleaning his wound. Two men usually, more if Cole's expecting trouble, Gabe answered. He hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. But Redemption Ridge isn't our only concern. There's something else you should know, Ezra. The Apache warrior's eyes narrowed, sensing the weight behind Gabe's words. When I helped prisoners escape from Fort Defiance, Gabe continued, choosing each word carefully, there was a woman and a child among them. An Apache woman with burn scars on her arms and a little girl about 5 years old. Ezra's body went rigid beneath Skylar's hands. The cabin's air suddenly seemed too thin to breathe. What are you saying? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gabe met his gaze directly. Her name was Nara. The child was Luna. The world stopped. Everything, the cabin, the lantern light, the pain of his wounds, receded into meaningless background noise as Ezra struggled to comprehend what he was hearing. You lie, he finally said, the words escaping in a ragged breath. I found them. In our burning home. I saw their bodies. You saw two bodies, Gabe corrected gently. In the chaos, with the smoke and flames, they weren't your wife and daughter, Ezra. Skylar looked between the men, understanding dawning in her young eyes. Luna is Ezra's daughter. She's alive. Gabe nodded, his scarred face solemn. Catherine and I helped smuggle them to a place called Hidden Springs, a settlement where Apache and whites lived together in secret. They were safe there, at least for a while. Ezra stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the stool. His face was a mask of barely controlled emotion, hope warring with disbelief, joy tangled with the fear of false promise. If this is a trick, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, if you seek to manipulate me with lies about my family, it's no trick, Gabe interrupted. From inside his coat, he withdrew a small object wrapped in soft leather. She wanted you to have this, if I ever found you. Ezra took the package with trembling hands. As he unwrapped it, a carved wooden amulet fell into his palm, a small horse fashioned from cedar wood, worn smooth from years of handling. His breath caught. I made this for Luna, he whispered. Before the raid. Nara kept it with her, Gabe confirmed. She never lost hope that you had survived, that someday you would find each other again. Ezra's fingers closed around the amulet, pressing it so tightly that the edges bit into his palm. 3 years of grief, the hollow emptiness that had consumed him, the rage that had sustained him, cracked open to reveal a fragile seed of hope he had thought long dead. Where are they now, he demanded. If not at Hidden Springs, then where? Gabe's expression darkened. That's the problem. About 2 years ago, Cole's men discovered Hidden Springs. There was warning, and most escaped, including Nara and Luna. They fled to a place called Salvation Canyon. I've never heard of this place, Ezra said, suspicion returning to edge his voice. Few have. It's deep in Apache territory, a natural fortress where many who escaped the reservations have gathered. Gabe's eyes held a warning, but Cole knows of it now. If he captures us, if he learns what we know, the implication hung in the air between them. Judge Cole would not rest until he had eliminated every Apache who might stand in the way of his land grab, especially those who had escaped his previous attempts to destroy them. Skylar, who had been listening with wide eyes, spoke up. That's why we need to rescue Mama first, she insisted. She knows where Salvation Canyon is. She can lead us there. Ezra stared at the wooden amulet in his hand, emotions warring across his weathered face. After believing his family lost for so long, the possibility that they lived seemed too miraculous to trust. Yet the horse amulet was real, solid in his palm, a talisman from a life he had thought forever extinguished. If what you say is true, he said finally, returning his attention to Gabe, then we face a choice. Rescue Catherine from Redemption Ridge, or warn Nara and Luna at Salvation Canyon. His eyes hardened. Cole will not wait. He will strike at both. Gabe nodded grimly. That's why we need to split up. I'll go to Redemption Ridge for Catherine. You take Skylar and head for Hidden Springs. Tala is still there, the old Apache woman who helped care for Luna. She can guide you to Salvation Canyon. No, Skylar protested immediately. I'm going with you to save Mama. It's too dangerous, Gabe countered. Cole knows your face now. His men will be watching for you. And they won't be watching for you? Skylar challenged, her small hands clenched in frustration. You said yourself he's been hunting you for years. Ezra, who had been silent, studying the map on the table, looked up. The child speaks truth, he said. You alone cannot breach Redemption Ridge. He traced a path on the map with his finger. But together we might succeed. And then, together, we find my family. The suggestion hung in the air, unexpected from a man who had every reason to prioritize his own kin over Catherine Hayes. Gabe studied Ezra's face, searching for hidden motives and finding only the straightforward calculation of a warrior who understood that unity offered their best chance of survival. Why would you help rescue Catherine? Gabe asked directly. Your wife and daughter are alive because of her, Ezra finished. You said she helped them escape. I owe her a life debt. His gaze shifted to Skylar, who watched him with undisguised hope. And I promised this brave one I would help her mother. Skylar's face brightened, but Gabe remained skeptical. Cole will have every gun in 3 counties looking for us by morning. The odds have never favored my people, Ezra interrupted with grim humor. Yet we survive. Outside, the wind had risen, moaning through the canyon like restless spirits. The horses shifted uneasily, sensing the approaching storm, both natural and man-made. Within the cabin, 3 unlikely allies faced each other across a weathered table, their shadows stretching and merging on the rough log walls. Very well, Gabe finally conceded. But we'll need a distraction, something to draw Cole's attention while we slip into Redemption Ridge. He rubbed his scarred jaw thoughtfully. And more guns. Ezra's eyes gleamed with the first real spark of life Skylar had seen in them. I know where we might find both. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the canyon walls with stripes of gold and shadow. The line shack stood silent, seemingly abandoned. No smoke rose from its chimney. No movement disturbed the stillness around it. From his position on the ridge overlooking the canyon, Judge Randall Cole surveyed the scene through brass field glasses. Tall and imposing, even at 52, Cole cut an impressive figure in his black coat and wide-brimmed hat. His neatly trimmed beard framed a face that might have been handsome were it not for the coldness of his pale blue eyes that had witnessed horrors and, more troublingly, ordered them. They're still in there, he stated with certainty. No one passed through either end of the canyon during the night. Beside him, Vernon shifted uncomfortably, his young face bruised from his fall the previous day. Shouldn't we just burn them out? Set fire to the shack? Cole shot his nephew a look of contempt. And risk burning Gabriel Hayes along with them? No, I want him alive. His gaze returned to the field glasses. He has information I need. Vernon scowled, embarrassment and resentment churning within him. He had failed to capture his traitorous cousin, failed to stop the Apache's escape. Only the knowledge that Cole needed him, that blood counted for something in his uncle's world of power and control, kept his fear at bay. What about Skylar? He asked, trying to sound unconcerned. What happens to her when we catch them? Cole lowered the field glasses, studying his nephew with clinical detachment. She's family, he said simply. She'll be corrected and returned to her proper place. Behind them, 20 men waited on horseback, a mix of deputized townsfolk and hired guns drawn by Cole's substantial bounty. They muttered among themselves, eager to earn their pay and uneasy about facing an Apache warrior who had already killed 3 of their own. Take 10 men and circle around to the far end of the canyon, Cole ordered one of his lieutenants, a grizzled man named Harker. The rest will come with me through the Persums. We'll approach from both sides, give them nowhere to run. As the men arranged themselves, Cole turned to Vernon. You stay with me, he said, his tone making it clear this was both protection and punishment. And try not to get yourself shot this time. The riders split into 2 groups, Harker leading his contingent toward the far entrance of the canyon, while Cole directed the remaining men toward the narrow pass. The morning sun glinted off rifle barrels as they began their advance, confident in their superior numbers and the trapped position of their quarry. They were halfway through the pass when the first shot rang out. A rider at the front of the column pitched backward off his horse, a red bloom spreading across his chest. More shots followed in quick succession, bullets ricocheting off the stone walls, creating a deadly hail of lead and rock fragments. "Ambush!" Cole shouted, drawing his revolver as he urged his horse behind an outcropping for cover. "Return fire!" His men scrambled for whatever protection the narrow passage offered, firing blindly toward the unseen assailants hidden among the rocks above. Vernon cowered behind his uncle, his own gun forgotten in the panic of unexpected attack. "It's a trap," Cole realized, his cold tactical mind reasserting itself through the chaos. Hayes knew we'd come through the pass. 3 more of his men fell before Cole ordered a retreat, the survivors pulling back in disarray to the canyon entrance. As they regrouped, the gunfire from the pass ceased, leaving an eerie silence broken only by the moans of the wounded. "Harker," Cole barked into the quiet. "Report! What's happening at your end?" No response came through the morning air. Cole's jaw tightened as he understood the full extent of their predicament. "They've taken out Harker's group too," he said, more to himself than to Vernon. "We're cut off from both sides." As if confirming his assessment, a single rifle shot echoed from the far end of the canyon, followed by complete silence. Vernon stared at his uncle, fear finally breaking through his facade of bravado. "What do we do now?" Cole's face hardened into a mask of cold fury. "We regroup. Get more men." His eyes narrowed as he gazed toward the silent line shack. "And then we burn everything between here and Redemption Ridge to the ground." Miles away, as the morning sun climbed higher in the Texas sky, Ezra, Gabe, and Skylar rode hard across the open plains, having long since left the canyon and its deadly confrontation behind. The black stallion carried Ezra and Skylar effortlessly, while Gabe followed on his chestnut mare. Behind them, dust rose from the hooves of a dozen riderless horses, Cole's mounts, scattered during the ambush. "Do you think they'll follow us?" Skylar asked, her voice bouncing with the rhythm of their gallop. "Not soon," Gabe answered. "The rock slide we triggered in the pass will take hours to clear, and we disabled most of their horses." Ezra, who had orchestrated the ambush using nothing but carefully placed rocks and strategic rifle fire, allowed himself a grim smile. "They will come," he said with certainty, "but we have bought time." The simple but effective trap had been Ezra's idea, using Cole's own confidence against him. While the judge had watched the seemingly empty line shack, they had slipped out through a forgotten root cellar beneath the cabin floor, emerging far enough away to circle behind their pursuers and set up the ambush in the pass. "No one was killed who didn't shoot first," Gabe had insisted before they implemented the plan, his eyes on Skylar. Ezra had agreed, though his reasons had more to do with practicality than mercy. Dead men told no tales, but they also yielded no information. And information about Redemption Ridge, about Catherine's exact location, about Cole's plans, was what they needed most. They had found both the distraction and the additional weapons Gabe had requested. The route to Redemption Ridge now lay open before them, at least temporarily. By midday, they reached a secluded watering hole surrounded by cottonwood trees, their leaves shimmering silver green in the breeze. Ezra reined in the stallion, allowing the tired animal to drink, while Skylar slid gratefully from its back. "We rest here," Ezra decided. "The horses need water, and we must plan our approach to Redemption Ridge." Gabe dismounted more stiffly, his wounded arm clearly troubling him despite his stoic silence. He removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow before kneeling beside the clear pool to splash water on his face. The reflection that stared back at him was that of a stranger, a scarred, haunted man far removed from the young soldier who had once believed in the righteousness of his cause. "Cole will send riders to warn Redemption Ridge," he said, rejoining the others in the shade of the largest cottonwood. "By nightfall, they'll know we're coming." Skylar sat cross-legged on the grass, her oversized hat removed to reveal hair the color of sun-bleached wheat. In the daylight, the resemblance between her and Gabe was more apparent. The same determined set of the jaw, the same storm cloud gray eyes. "Then we don't wait for nightfall," she suggested. "We go now while they're still expecting us tonight." Ezra nodded approvingly. "The child thinks like a warrior." Gabe frowned, studying the map he'd spread on the ground before them. Redemption Ridge is exposed in daylight. No cover for the last half-mile approach. So we don't approach as enemies, Ezra replied. From one of the saddlebags they'd claimed during their ambush, he withdrew a deputy's badge. We come as the law. Understanding dawned on Gabe's face. Cole's own men, he murmured, returning with prisoners. Schuyler looked between them, confusion giving way to realization. You mean I'll be your prisoner? And uncle, father will be too? Ezra nodded. Cole's men at Redemption Ridge will be watching for 3 riders approaching as allies. They will not expect 2 deputies delivering captives to their jail. The plan took shape as they rested in the cottonwood's dappled shade. Ezra, as the more physically intimidating of the 2 men, would pose as the deputy. Gabe and Schuyler, bound but not gagged, would be his prisoners. Once inside the mining settlement, they would locate Catherine and free her before Cole's warning could arrive. What about the men guarding Mama? Schuyler asked, her young face serious. We avoid killing if possible, Gabe insisted, glancing at Ezra. For your sake. Ezra met his gaze steadily. For the child's sake, he agreed. But if they threaten her or her mother, I make no promises. The frankness of his statement hung in the air between them, a reminder that their alliance was born of necessity rather than shared values. Gabe nodded once, accepting the terms without further argument. In the brutal calculus of survival on the frontier, such compromises were inevitable. As they prepared to depart, Schuyler approached Ezra, who was adjusting the stallion's makeshift bridle fashioned from strips of leather. Can I ask you something? She said hesitantly. Ezra turned, his dark eyes softening slightly at the child's serious expression. You may. Are you angry with Uncle Gabe, with my father, for being at your village when it was attacked? The question was direct, as only a child's could be. Ezra considered it carefully, aware of Gabe watching them from across the clearing. I was, he admitted finally. For 3 years I hated all who wore the blue coat, all who brought death to my people. He glanced toward Gabe. Perhaps I still do. But you're helping us, Schuyler pressed. Yes. Why? Ezra knelt to her level, his weathered face inches from hers. Because hatred is a fire that burns the one who carries it, he said quietly. My people know this truth. I forgot it for a time. He touched the wooden amulet now hanging from a cord around his neck. And because without him, without your mother, my Nara and Luna would truly be lost to me. Schuyler nodded solemnly, absorbing his words with the seriousness of a much older soul. Then, with the mercurial shift only children can manage, she smiled suddenly. I'm glad you didn't die in that tree, she declared. Despite everything, the pain of his wounds, the uncertainty that lay ahead, the grief of 3 lost years, Ezra felt his lips curve in response. As am I, little one, he replied. As am I. Redemption Ridge rose from the plains like a monument to failed ambition, its weathered buildings clinging to the hillside where silver had once promised prosperity. Now most of the structures stood abandoned, their windows dark eyes staring out at the empty land. Only the main street showed signs of habitation. The saloon, the assay office, converted to a jail, and a few stubborn businesses that survived on the patronage of Cole's men. Ezra approached the settlement at a steady trot, his face shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat taken from one of Cole's fallen deputies. Behind him, Gabe and Schuyler rode double on the chestnut mare, their hands bound before them in a convincing display of captivity. The deputy's badge gleamed on Ezra's chest, catching the afternoon sun as they drew closer to the watchful eyes of the settlement. 2 men lounged on the porch of the assay office, rifles resting across their laps. They straightened as the small procession approached, suspicion evident in their postures. Hold there, one called, raising his weapon. State your business. Ezra reined in the stallion, keeping his face tilted downward. When he spoke, he deepened his voice and adopted the drawling cadence he had heard from white settlers. Got prisoners for Judge Cole, he announced. Caught him trying to flee across the border. The guards exchanged glances. The taller one stepped forward, squinting against the sun. Don't recognize you, he said. Who sent you? Marshal Harker, Ezra replied, naming Cole's lieutenant from the ambush. Judge's orders were to bring him straight here. Got papers to prove it. He patted the saddlebag where they had stashed documents taken from Cole's men. The guard's suspicion visibly eased, though caution remained in his stance. "That's Hayes," he noted, eyeing Gabe. "Judge'll be pleased you caught him. But who's the girl?" "His daughter," Ezra answered. "Judge wants her, too." The second guard had approached during this exchange, circling to get a better look at the prisoners. "Wait a minute," he said slowly. "Weren't you with the judge's party this morning? Thought you were heading to that canyon." Ezra's hand drifted closer to the revolver at his hip. "Split up," he explained. "Judge sent riders in all directions once we lost their trail." The guard seemed to accept this, but his companion remained wary. "Let's see those papers," he demanded, hand extended. It was the moment of greatest risk. If they examined the forged documents too closely, or if word of the ambush had somehow reached them, the fragile deception would shatter. Skylar chose that moment to begin crying, loud, heart-wrenching sobs that drew all attention to her small, shaking form. "Please," she begged between tears. "I'm so hungry. We haven't eaten all day." Her performance was so convincing that even Ezra nearly reached out to comfort her before remembering his role. The guard's expression softened slightly at the sight of the distressed child. "Got food inside," the taller one said gruffly. "Bring 'em in. Papers can wait till they're secured." Ezra nodded, dismounting and helping Skylar down while maintaining his grip on her bound hands. Gabe followed, his face a mask of defeated resignation that concealed the alert calculation beneath. The assay office had been crudely converted into a jail, with a front room for the guards and 2 cells in the back. As they entered, Ezra's sharp eyes immediately took inventory. 2 guards visible, possibly more in the back rooms, keys hanging on a hook by the cells, a rear door that likely led to an alley. "Where's the woman prisoner?" he asked casually. "Judge wants them all together." The shorter guard jerked his thumb toward a door at the rear of the building. "Back room." Judge didn't want her in the cells where any minor could gawk at her. Gabe tensed imperceptibly at the mention of Catherine, but maintained his defeated posture. Skylar continued her performance, whimpering softly as the taller guard Bob unlocked the cell door. "In you go," he said not unkindly. "I'll fetch some food." As he turned to leave, Ezra made his move. With the speed and silence of a hunting cougar, he struck the guard at the base of the skull with the butt of his revolver. The man crumpled, without a sound. The second guard had only a moment to register surprise before Gabe, hands still bound but deadly accurate, delivered a kick that sent him sprawling against the wall. Ezra was on him in an instant, pressing the revolver to his throat. "Make no sound," he warned, "or it will be your last." The guard froze, eyes wide with fear and confusion. "You ain't no deputy," he managed to gasp. "No," Ezra agreed. "Now tell me about the woman. How many guard her?" Just Wilson," the guard stammered. "One man. She ain't tried to escape." Gabe had already retrieved the keys and freed his hands. "Watch them," he instructed Ezra, before turning to Skylar. "Stay here while I get your mother." The child nodded. All traces of her earlier distress vanished as she helped Ezra bind and gag the conscious guard. Gabe approached the rear door, gun drawn, and eased it open with the caution of a man who had survived countless similar moments. The back room was dimly lit by a single window, the afternoon sun barely penetrating the grime that coated the glass. A man sat dozing in a chair by the door, rifle across his lap. Beyond him, on a narrow cot against the far wall, sat a woman with hair the color of autumn flames. Catherine Hayes looked up as the door opened, her green eyes widening in recognition and disbelief. She made no sound, but the sudden tension in her body alerted her drowsing guard. Wilson began to turn, reaching for his rifle, but Gabe was faster. The butt of his revolver connected with the man's temple, sending him slumping to the floor unconscious. "Gabriel," Catherine breathed, rising from the cot. Despite days of captivity, she carried herself with dignity, her simple dress dirty but intact, her face thinner but unbowed. "How?" "No time," Gabe interrupted, moving to free her hands from their loose bindings. "Skylar's here. We need to leave before Cole's warning arrives." At the mention of her daughter, Catherine's composure nearly broke. "Skylar? Here? But it's too dangerous." "She's the reason I found you," Gabe explained, guiding Catherine toward the door. "She's the bravest soul I've ever known. Braver than me." They emerged into the front room to find Skylar standing watch while Ezra searched the fallen guards for additional weapons and ammunition. The child's face lit up at the sight of her mother, and she rushed forward into Catherine's arms. "Mama!" she cried, all pretense forgotten in the joy of reunion. Catherine held her daughter fiercely, tears streaming down her face as she stroked Skylar's hair. "My brave girl," she whispered. "My precious brave girl." Ezra watched this reunion with an unreadable expression, perhaps thinking of his own child, of Luna, somewhere in the wilderness, waiting for a father she might barely remember. The moment stretched, a fragile bubble of joy in the midst of danger. Then the bubble burst as hoofbeats thundered down the main street outside. "Cole's men," Gabe warned, peering through the grimy window. At least 5 riders, moving fast. Ezra had already moved to the rear door, checking the alley beyond. "Clear," he reported. "We can reach the horses if we move now." Catherine knelt quickly before Skylar, her hands gentle but urgent on the child's shoulders. "Listen to me," she said. "Whatever happens, stay close to Gabriel or Ezra. Do exactly as they say. Can you do that for me?" Skylar nodded, her earlier courage reasserting itself. "I already have been, Mama." A ghost of a smile touched Catherine's lips. "Of course you have." She rose, turning to face the 2 men who had risked everything to rescue her. "Let's go." They slipped into the alley as shouts erupted from the main street. Cole's warning had arrived. Ezra led the way, moving with the silent grace of a lifetime spent in the wilderness, while Gabe brought up the rear, his revolver ready. Catherine and Skylar hurried between them, the mother's arm protectively around her daughter's shoulders. The horses waited where they had left them, tethered behind an abandoned livery stable at the edge of town. Ezra reached them first, quickly checking for signs of discovery or tampering. Finding none, he helped Catherine and Skylar mount the chestnut mare. "Ride for the eastern creek," he instructed Gabe as the latter swung onto the stallion's back. "I will create a diversion, then follow." Gabe started to protest, but Ezra had already melted into the shadows between buildings, moving back toward the center of town. A moment later, gunfire erupted from the saloon, followed by shouts of alarm and confusion. "That's our signal," Gabe said grimly. "Hold tight." They galloped away from Redemption Ridge, the thunder of their horses' hooves drowned by the growing chaos behind them. As they crested the first rise, Catherine looked back to see flames beginning to lick at the saloon's wooden walls, Ezra's diversion taking on a life of its own. "Will he be all right?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the wind of their passage. Gabe's face was set in determined lines. If anyone can survive that hornet's nest, it's him. They rode hard for nearly an hour, following the meandering path of a seasonal creek that offered both water and the shelter of scrub growth along its banks. When they finally stopped to rest the horses, Skylar immediately climbed the tallest nearby tree, scanning the horizon for pursuers. "I don't see anyone," she reported, shading her eyes against the late afternoon sun. "But I don't see Ezra either." Catherine, who had been silently absorbing the reality of their situation, finally spoke. "Gabriel," she said quietly, using his full name as she always did in serious moments. "What happens now? Where are we going?" Gabe met her eyes, seeing the strength and resilience that had first drawn him to her years ago at Fort Defiance. "Hidden Springs," he answered, "and then Salvation Canyon." Catherine's breath caught. "You found them? Nara and Luna?" "Not yet," Gabe admitted, "but Ezra knows now. They're alive, Catherine, and with your help, we can find them before Cole does." Understanding dawned in Catherine's eyes. "That's why he helped rescue me. For them." "For them," Gabe agreed, "and for Skylar. And perhaps," he added with the faintest hint of wonder, "for reasons even he doesn't fully understand yet." Their conversation was interrupted by Skylar's excited shout from her perch. "Riders coming! Bastille!" Gabe's hand went to his gun, but Catherine laid a restraining touch on his arm. "Wait," she said. "Look." A lone horseman approached at a gallop, riding low over his mount's neck, a black stallion moving with the fluid grace of wind over water. Behind him, distantly, dust rose from multiple pursuers, but the gap was widening rather than closing. "Ezra," Gabe breathed, relief evident in his voice. The Apache warrior reached them minutes later, reining in the stallion with a gentle touch that belied the urgency of their situation. "Cole's men follow," he reported without preamble. "We must reach Hidden Springs by nightfall." "How many?" Gabe asked, already helping Catherine back onto their horse. 10, perhaps 12, Ezra answered. They will not abandon the chase easily. Catherine's face paled. They'll follow us straight to Hidden Springs, to Tala and the others. Ezra nodded grimly, which is why we must divide their forces. He turned to Gabe. You take Catherine and Skylar to Hidden Springs by the eastern path. I will lead the pursuers south, away from your trail. No, Skylar protested immediately. We stay together. But Gabe was already nodding, the tactical necessity clear to him. It's the only way to protect Hidden Springs, he said to Skylar. Ezra can outride them, lose them in the Badlands. And then, Catherine asked softly, where will you go? Ezra touched the wooden amulet at his neck. To find my family, he said simply, at Salvation Canyon. The finality in his voice made clear that he had made his decision. This brief alliance, formed in the chaos of pursuit and revelation, had served its purpose. Now separate paths beckoned, Gabe to safety with his newfound family, Ezra to the reunion he had thought impossible for 3 long years. Skylar slipped from her mother's grasp, approaching Ezra with determination in her young eyes. You promised, she said, her voice quavering but resolute. You promised to help save Mama, and you did. Now I'm promising you something. She held out her small hand, still encased in her mother's leather glove. I'll help you find Luna. We all will. Ezra looked down at the offered hand, then at the faces of these unlikely companions. A former enemy, a healer who had saved his wife, and a child who had cut him free when he had resigned himself to death. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around eyes that had known only hardness and grief for too long. The path to Salvation Canyon is dangerous, he said, taking Skylar's hand in his much larger one. Cole will not stop hunting us. We know? Catherine said, stepping forward to stand beside her daughter. But Skylar's right. We're in this together now. Gabe joined them, his scarred face solemn. We'll draw them off together, he said to Ezra. Give them multiple targets, multiple trails to follow. Between us, we know this territory better than Cole ever will. For a moment, Ezra remained silent, weighing their offer against the instinct for solitary survival that had kept him alive for 3 years. Then with a nod that carried the weight of a sacred oath, he accepted. Together, he agreed. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, 4 riders set out across the Texas wilderness, not in different directions as they had planned, but as of the single unit, their paths now inextricably linked by bonds stronger than blood or tribe. Behind them, the dust of pursuit rose like a distant storm cloud, while ahead lay Hidden Springs and the promise of reunion. Ezra rode at their head, the wooden amulet bouncing against his chest with each stride of the stallion beneath him. For the first time in 3 years, he allowed himself to fully embrace the hope that had taken root in his heart. The hope that somewhere beyond these blood-soaked hills, Nara and Luna awaited him. And for the first time since that terrible dawn, when his world had burned to ash, Ezra Swift-Arrow found himself silently thanking the spirits for guiding his path, not toward death as he had wished, but toward life in all its painful, beautiful complexity. Hidden Springs existed in the space between worlds, neither fully Apache nor settler, neither acknowledged on any map nor entirely forgotten. Nestled in a sheltered valley where 3 natural springs bubbled up from ancient limestone, the small settlement consisted of a dozen rough cabins arranged in a loose circle around a central clearing. Gardens heavy with corn, beans, and squash filled the spaces between dwellings, while fruit trees planted by some optimistic soul years ago offered dappled shade against the Texas sun. Ezra reined in the black stallion at the valley's edge as dusk painted the landscape in shades of purple and gold. Behind him, Gabe, Catherine, and Skylar halted their mount, exhaustion evident in their slumped shoulders after the long day's ride. We lost the last of Cole's men 3 miles back, Ezra reported, his keen eyes scanning the trail behind them. But they will find the trail again by morning. Gabe nodded grimly. Then we'd best make use of the night. He studied the peaceful settlement below, noting the thin wisps of cook fire smoke rising from several cabins. Hidden Springs looks quiet. No sign Cole's men have been here recently. Catherine adjusted Skylar's position in front of her on the saddle, her arms tightening protectively around her daughter. Tala will know if there's been trouble, she said. If anyone's still watching the settlement. They descended into the valley as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Their approach did not go unnoticed. A figure emerged from the nearest cabin, rifle in hand, but held non-threateningly at her side. An elderly Apache woman, her face deeply lined by sun and time, her silver-streaked hair bound in a single braid that fell to her waist. "Tala," Catherine called softly as they drew near. The old woman lowered her rifle, recognition softening her watchful expression. "Catherine Hayes," she replied in accented English. "The spirits said you would return." Her dark eyes shifted to Ezra, widening slightly. "And they have sent Nara's warrior at last." Ezra dismounted in a single fluid motion, approaching Tala with the respect due an elder. He spoke several words in Apache, a formal greeting that acknowledged her status and wisdom. Tala responded in kind, then switched to English for the benefit of the others. "Come inside, all of you. These are dangerous times for talking under open skies." The interior of Tala's cabin was warm and fragrant with herbs hanging from the rafters. A small fire burned in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across walls adorned with woven blankets and dried gourds. The space was small but meticulously ordered. Each implement, each bundle of herbs, each carved wooden figure in its proper place. Skylar, overcome by exhaustion now that safety temporarily surrounded them, curled up on a buffalo hide near the fire and was asleep within moments. Catherine covered her with a blanket, brushing a tender hand across her daughter's forehead before joining the adults at Tala's wooden table. "Nara and Luna," Ezra said without preamble, his voice tightly controlled. They were here. It wasn't a question, but Tala nodded anyway, her ancient eyes reflecting the firelight. "2 winters they stayed among us. The woman healed from her burns. The child grew strong." A smile softened her weathered features. "Luna has her father's spirit, wild as the wind." Ezra's composure cracked slightly at this description of the daughter he had thought lost forever. His hands, resting on the table, curled into fists, then slowly relaxed. "Why did they leave?" he asked. "Where is Salvation Canyon?" Tala glanced toward Catherine, a silent communication passing between them. Catherine nodded once, permission granted to share closely guarded knowledge. "Judge Cole's men found hidden springs 2 years ago," Tala explained. "Not by design, hunters who strayed too far from their usual grounds. They saw what should not be seen. Apache and white living together in peace." "Cole couldn't allow that," Gabe interjected, his voice bitter with old knowledge. It contradicted everything he's been telling the settlers about Apache savagery. "The hunters were dealt with," Tala continued, her tone making it clear what fate had befallen the unfortunate men. "But we knew others would come. Those with families, especially those known to Cole, had to leave, including Nara and Luna," Ezra concluded. Tala nodded. "They went to Salvation Canyon with others from the settlement, a place deep in the Forgotten Mountains, where the old spirits still protect their people." "How do we find it?" Gabe asked. Tala's gaze returned to Catherine. "She knows the way. She helped establish the refuge." All eyes turned to Catherine, who met Ezra's intense stare without flinching. "After the massacre at Red River Bend," she said quietly, "there were other survivors besides Nara and Luna. Children mostly, and a few women. They needed somewhere safe, somewhere Cole and the army couldn't reach them." "So you created Salvation Canyon," Ezra said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "A sanctuary." Catherine nodded. "A group of us, those who couldn't stomach what was happening to the Apache people. We found a canyon system so remote that not even local tribes had settled there permanently. Natural caves, fresh water, game aplenty, and only one narrow approach that could be easily defended." "And Cole knows of it now, Gabe stated grimly. "He suspects," Catherine corrected. "He's heard rumors, captured scouts, but he doesn't know the location exactly. That's why he was holding me, trying to force me to lead him there." Ezra's expression darkened with renewed urgency. "Then we must reach Salvation Canyon before he pieces together enough information to find it himself." "It's 3 days' hard ride," Catherine warned, "through the worst country you can imagine. Hardly any water, Apache burial grounds that even the bravest warriors avoid, and the Forgotten Mountains themselves." "We leave at first light," Ezra decided, rising from the table with the air of a man who had endured enough delays. "Every hour gives Cole time to gather more men. to find more clues to the canyon's location. Gabe shared a concerned look with Catherine. We need supplies. The horses need rest. And Skylar, will come with us, Catherine interrupted firmly. I won't leave her behind for Cole to find. Not again. Silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the soft crackling of the fire and Skylar's steady breathing. Outside an owl called, its mournful cry echoing across the valley like a portent. There is something else you should know, Tala said finally, her voice dropping lower as if imparting a dangerous secret. Judge Cole does not hunt the Apache only for land or gold. Ezra's eyes narrowed. What do you mean? His hatred runs deeper than greed, Tala explained. 20 years ago, Cole was a young rancher expanding his territory north of here. He and his wife and son made camp near an Apache hunting ground during a time of great hunger for the tribe. Little understanding began to dawn on Gabe's scarred face. I've heard whispers of this story, he said, never the full account. The hunting party found them, Tala continued, her eyes distant with the memory of tales passed among her people. They took the food, the horses. In the struggle, Cole's wife and son were killed. So his crusade against the Apache is revenge, Ezra concluded, his voice hardening. Blood for blood. Tala shook her head slowly. It is more twisted than simple revenge. Cole survived only because he hid, watching as his family died. The shame of his cowardice festered within him, turned to hatred. Each Apache death feeds his need to prove his courage, to erase his shame. The revelation hung in the air like smoke, adding new dimensions to their understanding of the man who hunted them. Not just a land-hungry tyrant, but a broken soul whose every atrocity was an attempt to silence his own demons. It changes nothing, Ezra said finally, though his eyes had grown more thoughtful. We still must reach Salvation Canyon before Cole does. It changes how we might defeat him, Catherine countered softly. A man driven by shame has different weaknesses than one driven by greed. Gabe nodded slowly, the tactician in him already considering this new angle. Catherine's right. Understanding Cole's true motivation gives us an advantage. Tala rose from the table with the careful movements of age, crossing to a cedar chest in the corner of the cabin. From it, she withdrew a rolled deerskin map, yellowed with age and marked with symbols unfamiliar to the white eye. The path to Salvation Canyon, she said, spreading the map on the table. It is not a journey for the faint-hearted. As the night deepened around the small cabin, 4 determined souls bent over the ancient map, planning a desperate journey into lands where few dared to tread. And outside, under the watchful eyes of the stars, Hidden Springs continued its precarious existence, a fragile testament to the possibility that different worlds could, with care and courage, find ways to coexist. They departed Hidden Springs before dawn, their saddlebags filled with Tala's provisions, dried meat, cornmeal, medicinal herbs, in precious water and skin bags treated to keep their contents cool. The old woman had blessed each traveler in the Apache way, touching their foreheads with a mixture of pollen and sacred earth, murmuring prayers to spirits older than memory. To Skylar, now riding her own pony, a gentle mare provided by one of the settlement's families, Tala had given a special gift, a small medicine pouch on a leather cord to be worn around her neck alongside her mother's pendant. For protection, the old woman had explained, her gnarled fingers fastening the cord, and to remind the spirits that you walk between 2 worlds belonging to both. Their path led them northeast, away from the settled territories, and into the harsh badlands that formed a natural barrier between the frontier towns and the forgotten mountains beyond. Ezra rode point, his Apache instincts guiding them through terrain that seemed, to less experienced eyes, devoid of navigable paths. Gabe brought up the rear, constantly scanning for signs of pursuit, while Catherine and Skylar rode between them. By midday, the gentle valley of Hidden Springs had given way to a fractured landscape of red rock canyons and stunted juniper. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the air into a shimmering veil that distorted distant landmarks. Water became precious, rationed carefully under Ezra's watchful eye. The Apache burial grounds lie ahead, he announced as they paused in the shadow of a towering sandstone formation. We must pass through before nightfall. Catherine nodded solemnly, understanding the significance of this leg of their journey. The spirits of the dead are said to walk freely there after dark. she explained to Skylar, whose eyes had widened with a mixture of fear and fascination. Real spirits? The child asked, clutching the medicine pouch Tala had given her. Real enough to those who believe, Gabe answered, his tone gentle despite his natural skepticism, and real enough to keep Cole's men from following us too closely through that territory. This was the strategic advantage of their chosen route. Few white men would willingly enter lands so steeped in Apache spiritual significance, especially as darkness approached. Fear of the supernatural might accomplish what bullets could not. They continued their journey as the afternoon waned, entering a valley marked by stone cairns and ancient pictographs. The burial grounds announced themselves subtly. No graves in the traditional sense, but rock formations arranged in patterns meaningful to Apache eyes. Cedar branches tied with faded cloth that fluttered in the occasional breeze like ghostly fingers. Ezra grew more solemn as they rode deeper into the sacred space, occasionally murmuring words in his native tongue, prayers or apologies for disturbing the rest of his ancestors. Even the horses seemed to sense the difference in the air, moving with subdued steps, ears flicking nervously at sounds only they could hear. Skylar pressed closer to her mother, her young face serious with respect rather than fear. Are there Apache children buried here too? She asked in a whisper. Catherine nodded, and women, and warriors, and all returning to the earth to be reborn in the circle of life. The child considered this with the peculiar gravity she sometimes exhibited. Like Papa, my adopted Papa, she clarified. And like Ezra's family too, before he knew they weren't really dead. The innocent observation carried such complex emotional weight that the adults exchanged glances over her head, momentarily united in appreciation of a child's clarity. In Skylar's world, the boundaries between life and death seemed more permeable, more forgiving than in their own. They had nearly cleared the burial grounds when Ezra raised his hand sharply, signaling for immediate halt. The group froze, trusting his senses without question. Riders, he said quietly, nodding toward the ridge to their west. 5, maybe 6. Gabe's hand moved instinctively to his revolver. Cole's men? Ezra studied the distant figures for a moment, his keen eyes narrowing. No, he decided. Apache, scouts, most likely. Catherine let out a relieved breath, but Gabe remained tense. Friendly? He asked, well aware that not all Apache bands would welcome a white man in their territory, especially one who had once worn a soldier's uniform. Unknown, Ezra replied honestly, but they have already seen us. To run would be to invite suspicion or arrows. Decision made, Ezra raised his arm in the Apache greeting of peace, clearly visible against the reddening sky. For long moments there was no response from the distant riders. Then slowly one figure raised an arm in mirror acknowledgement. They will approach, Ezra said, lowering his arm. Be still. Let me speak first. The scouts descended from the ridge like shadows, their horses' hooves making barely a sound on the rocky soil. As they drew closer, details emerged. 5 warriors, their faces painted for scouting duties, their weapons held ready but not aimed. Their leader, a man perhaps a few years younger than Ezra, wore a single eagle feather in his hair. The two groups faced each other in tense silence, evaluation passing between them without words. Then Ezra spoke in Apache, his deep voice carrying authority despite his status as visitor in their territory. The exchange continued for several minutes, incomprehensible to all but Catherine, whose limited understanding of the language allowed her to follow the general thrust of the conversation. Finally, Ezra turned to his companions. This is Two Hawks, he introduced the leader. He and his men scout for their band in the Forgotten Mountains. They have had encounters with white soldiers, Cole's hired guns wearing army uniforms. Two Hawks spoke in halting English, his dark eyes intense. Judge Cole brings many men. They search for Canyon, for Apache hiding place. He made a sweeping gesture. They cross sacred ground without respect. Take Apache prisoner for questioning. Alarm rippled through the small group at this news. Cole was moving faster than they had anticipated, already pushing into territory few white men dared to enter. How close is Cole to finding a Salvation Canyon? Catherine asked urgently. Two Hawks shook his head. Prisoners not talk yet, but Cole has map, bad map, made by afraid Apache who want to live. It show wrong places, but also show right direction. Then we must hurry, Ezra said, calculation evident in his expression. How far to the canyon from here? 2 days for you, Two Hawks answered. 1 day for Cole, who rides from other direction. He gestured to the northeast. But Cole must pass through Red Valley. Many of my people wait there. They will slow him. A grim smile touched Ezra's lips, the first genuine smile they had seen from him. Your people fight. Two Hawks nodded once, pride evident in his bearing. We remember Red River Bend. We do not forget our dead. An understanding passed between the two Apache men, warriors separated by circumstance but united in common cause. Two Hawks turned to his scouts, issuing rapid instructions. One warrior detached himself from the group, spurring his horse toward the mountains. He will tell others, you come, Two Hawks explained. Tell them Ezra Swift Arrow returns with friends. Tell them to watch for Cole's soldiers trying to circle behind. Thank you, Catherine said with simple sincerity. Two Hawks studied her for a moment, then shifted his gaze to Skylar, who met his intense scrutiny without flinching. Finally, he looked to Gabe, recognition slowly dawning in his eyes. You were Bluecoat, he said, at Fort Defiance. Gabe nodded, not attempting to deny his past. I was. You helped our women escape, children too. Two Hawks touched his chest, my sister among them. This revelation shifted something in the atmosphere between the groups, a tightening of invisible bonds, a recognition of the complex web of debt and alliance that had brought them to this moment. Two Hawks reached into a pouch at his waist and withdrew a small object, which he tossed to Gabe. A military button, its brass surface tarnished but still recognizable as belonging to a captain's uniform. I took from dead Bluecoat, Two Hawks explained. Man who tried to stop escaping Apache. Man you fought. Gabe stared at the button in his palm, memories clearly washing over him. Captain Reynolds, he murmured. I didn't know he died that night. You fought for right side, Two Hawks said simply. Now we fight together again. With that pronouncement, the Apache scouts wheeled their horses and melted back into the landscape, becoming one with the gathering dusk. Only Two Hawks remained, pointing toward a narrow defile barely visible in the cliff face ahead. That way's safe for night camp, he advised. Water there. We guard your back until morning. Then he too was gone, leaving them alone in the deepening twilight of the burial grounds. Ezra turned to the others, new urgency in his bearing. We must reach Salvation Canyon by tomorrow night, he said. Cole draws too close. They made camp in the sheltered defile Two Hawks had indicated, finding a small spring bubbling from the rock face, a precious gift in this arid landscape. As darkness fell completely, transforming the burial grounds into a realm of deep shadow and whispering wind, they gathered close around a small, smokeless fire. Skylar, though exhausted, remained wakeful, her gray eyes reflecting the dancing flames. Will we find Luna tomorrow? She asked Ezra, who sat slightly apart, his face half in shadow. The question hung in the air, laden with hope and fear in equal measure. Ezra touched the wooden amulet at his neck, his expression softening slightly. If the spirits are kind, he answered, his voice unusually gentle, and if Cole's men do not reach the canyon first. They won't, Skylar stated with a child's certainty. Two Hawks and his people will stop them, and we'll get there in time. She fingered her medicine pouch. Tala said the spirits would protect us. Catherine watched her daughter with a mixture of pride and concern, aware that the journey had changed Skylar in ways both visible and invisible. The sheltered child of Redemption Ridge was gone, replaced by a young girl who had witnessed violence and courage in equal measure, who had formed bonds with people across the divisions of race and history. Try to sleep, little fox, Gabe urged, using his old nickname for her as he spread a blanket near the fire. Tomorrow will demand all our strength. As Skylar finally succumbed to exhaustion, curling against her mother's side, the adults exchanged glances, heavy with unspoken thoughts. The journey had brought them this far, unlikely allies united by circumstance and necessity, but the hardest test still lay ahead, in a canyon where the last free Apache fought to preserve their way of life, and where a child believed her father would find his family once more. Ezra took first watch, his silhouette motionless against the star-filled sky as the others settled into uneasy sleep. In the distance, a coyote called, a lonely sound that seemed to echo the yearning in his own heart as Salvation Canyon waited, just beyond reach. The Forgotten Mountains earned their name honestly, a jumbled mass of peaks and canyons so remote and inhospitable that even the most detailed maps mark them simply as unexplored territory. Jagged spires of red rock thrust skyward like accusing fingers, while narrow defiles cut through the stone like ancient wounds. Their second day of travel took them deep into this forbidding landscape, following trails that existed more in Catherine's memory than in any physical marking. The horses struggled over rocky terrain where no grass grew, their sides heaving with effort in the thin, dry air. By midday, even Ezra, whose endurance seemed limitless, showed signs of strain, his jaw tight with determination as he scanned the horizon for landmarks only he could recognize. "We're close," Catherine assured them during a brief rest in the shadow of a towering cliff. "The canyon entrance lies just beyond that northern ridge." Gabe passed a water skin to Skylar, who drank sparingly despite her obvious thirst. The child had not complained once during the grueling journey, matching her elder's resolve with a quiet courage that continued to impress them all. "Any sign of pursuit?" Gabe asked Ezra, who had climbed a nearby outcropping for a better view of the trail behind them. "Dust to the southwest," Ezra reported, descending with the fluid grace that seemed undiminished by exhaustion. "Perhaps 5 miles back, riders moving fast." The news cast a pall over their brief respite. Cole's men had somehow bypassed the Apache resistance in Red Valley, perhaps finding another route through the treacherous mountains. "We ride now," Ezra decided, already moving toward the horses. "No more stops until we reach the canyon." They pushed onward through the afternoon heat, climbing steadily toward the northern ridge Catherine had indicated. The terrain grew increasingly difficult. Narrow ledges where the horses had to proceed in single file, loose scree that shifted treacherously underfoot, gullies carved by flash floods that forced lengthy detours. The sun had begun its descent toward the western horizon when they finally crested the ridge and beheld Salvation Canyon for the first time. Below them stretched a hidden valley, its floor green with vegetation nurtured by a small stream that wound through its center. Natural caves dotted the canyon walls, some showing signs of habitation. Smoke stains above entrances, small gardens terraced into the gentler slopes, a corral where horses grazed peacefully, and people, perhaps 30 or 40 Apache, moving about their daily tasks in the late afternoon light, unaware of the visitors watching from above or the threat approaching from behind. Ezra's breath caught audibly at the sight. His people, free, alive, continuing their ways despite the world that sought to destroy them. Somewhere among them, Nara and Luna lived and breathed, believing him dead even as he had believed them lost. "There," Catherine said softly, pointing to a series of caves halfway up the far wall of the canyon. "That's where Nara usually stays, with the healers and the children." Ezra's gaze fixed on the location she indicated, his eyes burning with intensity, as if he could somehow see through stone to the family within. Then, with visible effort, he tore his attention away, turning back to scan the trail behind them. "The dust is closer," he reported grimly. "Cole's men will reach the ridge within an hour." "Then we'd better get down there and warn them," Gabe said, already urging his horse toward the narrow switchback trail that led into the canyon below. They descended as quickly as safety allowed, sending small cascades of pebbles ahead of them to announce their approach. By the time they reached the canyon floor, a group of Apache warriors had assembled to meet them, bows drawn and rifles raised. An older man stepped forward, his bearing that of a leader, his face lined with experience and wariness. "Grey Wolf," Catherine greeted him, speaking in Apache out of respect. "We come with warning. Cole and his men approach from the south ridge." The leader's eyes widened slightly in recognition. "Medicine woman," he acknowledged, using Catherine's name among his people. "We had word you were taken prisoner." "I was freed," she replied, gesturing to her companions, "by my daughter and by these brave men." Grey Wolf's attention shifted to Ezra, recognition dawning in his weathered face. "Swift Arrow," he said, genuine surprise in his voice. "The spirits return you to us after 3 winters." Ezra dismounted, approaching the leader with proper respect. "I come to find my family," he said simply, "and to fight beside you against the one who burned our village." A murmur ran through the gathered Apache at this declaration. Grey Wolf nodded solemnly, turning to issue rapid orders to his warriors. Men and women immediately began moving through the canyon, gathering children, securing horses, preparing defensive positions with the efficiency of those long accustomed to the threat of attack. Nara is in the healing cave, Grey Wolf told Ezra, pointing to the location Catherine had identified earlier, with the sick children. Luna helps her. Ezra stood motionless for a heartbeat, absorbing the reality that his wife and daughter were mere steps away after 3 years of believing them ashen in memory. Then he was moving, striding toward the path that led up the canyon wall, his exhaustion forgotten in the surge of desperate hope that propelled him forward. Skylar made to follow him, but Catherine gently held her back. "This moment belongs to them alone," she explained softly. "We will meet them soon enough." The child nodded reluctantly, understanding in her eyes beyond her years. "I hope Luna likes me," she said, revealing the simple concern beneath her outward bravery. "She will love you," Catherine assured her daughter, stroking her hair. "How could she not?" Grey Wolf approached Gabe, studying the former soldier with undisguised suspicion. "You were Bluecoat," he stated, not a question, but an accusation. Gabe met his gaze steadily. "I was. Now I fight for my family." He nodded toward Catherine and Skylar. "And for justice." The Apache leader considered this, then nodded once. "Two Hawks sent message about you. Said you helped our people escape the fort." His expression remained stern. "One good deed does not erase a lifetime of wrong." "No," Gabe agreed quietly. "It doesn't. But it can be a beginning." Grey Wolf seemed to accept this philosophy, turning his attention to the more pressing matter of defense. "How many men does Cole bring?" "At least 12 that we saw," Gabe answered. "Possibly more behind them, well armed." "We have 20 warriors," Grey Wolf said, "plus the women who can fight, and the advantage of position." He gestured to the narrow entrance to the canyon, where several Apache were already positioning boulders for an avalanche that could seal the passage. "Cole's men must come through there. They will find death waiting." Catherine stepped forward. "What of the children, the elderly? If the fight goes badly?" "There is another way out," Grey Wolf assured her. "A hidden path known only to us, leading north through the mountains. The vulnerable ones will be taken there if necessary." A commotion near the healing caves drew their attention. Ezra had emerged, but not alone. Beside him walked a woman whose quiet dignity shone even at a distance, slender but strong, with a face marked by both suffering and joy. And clinging to her hand, half hidden behind her skirts, a small figure with wild black hair and curious eyes. Nara moved with the deliberate grace of a healer, but beneath her calm demeanor lay the unmistakable vigilance of a survivor. 3 years of protecting her daughter in a world intent on their destruction had hardened the gentle nurse Ezra once knew into someone both compassionate and formidable. Her arms, revealed by the short sleeves of her deerskin dress, bore the scars of the fire that had nearly claimed her life, badges of resilience rather than marks of suffering. At her waist hung a medicine pouch, but also a hunting knife with a bone handle nearly identical to the one Ezra had once carved for her. Nara and Luna, alive, whole, returning to the world with Ezra as if stepping from a dream into reality. Catherine felt tears sting her eyes as she watched this reunion she had helped make possible. Beside her, Skylar stared in undisguised fascination at the child who had survived against all odds, just as she herself had done. But there was no time for proper introductions or the sharing of stories 3 years in the making. A runner appeared at the canyon entrance, his urgent voice carrying clearly in the hushed atmosphere. "Riders coming, less than a mile away." The peaceful moment shattered like glass. Grey Wolf barked orders, warriors running to their positions, while women hurried children toward the caves. "The path to the North Ridge," Nara said quickly in Apache, her eyes meeting Ezra's with fierce determination. "I know a way to block it if Cole's men find it." She turned to Catherine. "I need your help." Catherine nodded without hesitation. "What about the children?" "The elders will guard them in the deep caves," Nara replied, her hand resting protectively on Luna's shoulder. "Our daughters have survived too much to fall now." She knelt before Luna, speaking in rapid Apache before switching to English. "Go with the elders, little one. Your father has returned as I promised, and I will make sure he stays." Luna looked between her parents, her young face solemn with understanding beyond her years. "Fight well, Mama," she said, embracing Nara briefly before joining the other children, being led deeper into the canyon's network of caves. Nara straightened, drawing the knife from her belt. "I was a healer before the fire. she told Catherine as they prepared to move. After it, I learned that sometimes healing means stopping those who bring pain. Ezra watched this exchange with newfound wonder. The woman he had married had been gentle, peace-loving. The woman who had survived was something more, a warrior in her own right, tempered by hardship into steel. Ezra rejoined the others, his face transformed by the brief reunion, grief and rage replaced by fierce determination. This was no longer a man with nothing to lose, but one with everything to protect. I will fight with the warriors at the entrance, he declared, checking his rifle. Cole must not reach the canyon floor. Gabe nodded, his own decision made. I'll join you. I know Cole's tactics. Catherine turned to Skylar, kneeling to meet her daughter's eyes. Go with the other children, she instructed gently but firmly. Follow Nara. She'll keep you safe. But Skylar shook her head, stubborn determination in her young face. I want to stay with you, Mama. I can help. Not this time, little fox, Gabe interjected, his voice brooking no argument. This is not a fight for children. Before Skylar could protest further, a woman approached, not Nara, but another Apache healer who had worked alongside Catherine in the past. I will take her to the children's cave, she offered. She will be safe there. With visible reluctance, Skylar allowed herself to be led away, looking back over her shoulder until Catherine and Gabe were out of sight. Catherine watched her go, heart torn between maternal fear and pride in the extraordinary child who had cut Ezra free, setting in motion all that had followed. She is brave, your daughter, Ezra observed quietly. Like her mother. Catherine managed a smile despite the tension thrumming through the canyon. And like her father, she added, glancing at Gabe. There was no more time for words. The sound of approaching horsemen echoed through the canyon entrance, and the defenders moved swiftly to their positions. Ezra and Gabe joined the Apache warriors concealed among the rocks overlooking the narrow passage, while Catherine headed for the healing caves to prepare for inevitable wounds. The first riders appeared at the entrance, scouts for Cole's main force, moving cautiously into unknown territory. They made it halfway through the passage before Grey Wolf gave the signal. Warriors rose from their hiding places, arrows and bullets finding their marks with deadly precision. The scouts fell without firing a shot, their horses bolting back the way they had come. A temporary victory, but one that would only alert Cole to the reception awaiting him. The real battle had yet to begin. It didn't take long. Cole's voice carried clearly into the canyon, amplified by the stone walls. Apache, I know you're in there. Send out Catherine Hayes and the girl, and the rest of you can live. Gabe and Ezra exchanged glances, recognizing the lie for what it was. Cole had no intention of letting any Apache survive this encounter, not when they could testify to his crimes, not when their existence contradicted the narrative he had built to justify his land grab. He will try to circle around, Ezra predicted, scanning the ridge above for signs of movement. Look for another way in. Even as he spoke, gunfire erupted from the south ridge, a distraction while other riders attempted to find the hidden northern path out of the canyon. Grey Wolf cursed, dispatching warriors to intercept this flanking maneuver. The battle devolved quickly into chaos. Shots exchanged across the canyon entrance, small skirmishes along the ridgeline. The defenders spread increasingly thin as Cole's forces probed for weaknesses. Despite being outnumbered, the Apache held their ground, their intimate knowledge of the terrain providing an advantage that partially offset Cole's superior firepower. On the northern ridge, Nara and Catherine worked swiftly to create an avalanche trap. Years of gathering medicinal plants in these mountains had taught Nara every weakness in the stone, every balanced boulder that could be toppled with minimal effort. There, she pointed to a natural choke point in the narrow path. Those rocks, if we can dislodge them when Cole's men pass beneath. Catherine nodded, understanding immediately. How do we trigger it? Nara pulled a small pouch from her belt. Black powder, she explained, taken from the cartridges of dead soldiers over the years. Just enough for this. With experienced hands, she packed the powder into a small crevice beneath the precarious rock formation, creating a rudimentary but effective trap. Catherine watched with growing respect for the woman who had not just survived, but had learned to fight back on her own terms. You did more than just hide these past 3 years, Catherine observed. A ghost of a smile touched Nara's lips. When you believe the one you love is dead, you must become both halves, mother and father, healer and protector. She finished setting the trap and nodded toward the path below, where three of Cole's men were cautiously advancing. Now we wait until they're beneath us. An hour into the fight, with the sun now setting behind the western peaks, Ezra spotted a lone figure picking his way down a nearly invisible trail on the eastern wall. Not one of Cole's hired guns, but Vernon Cole himself, the judge's nephew. The boy moved with the confidence of someone following specific instructions, heading not toward the main battle, but toward the caves where the children and elderly had taken refuge. "The boy!" Ezra hissed to Gabe, pointing out Vernon's position. "He knows another way in. Someone has told him." Gabe's face darkened with understanding. Cole tortured information from a prisoner. He's sending Vernon for Catherine and Skylar while we're distracted by the main force. Without hesitation, both men abandoned their position, moving swiftly along the canyon floor toward the caves, keeping to cover whenever possible. They were halfway there when riders burst through the main entrance. Cole had ordered a direct charge, sacrificing men to draw the defenders' attention. Gunfire intensified around them, but Ezra and Gabe remained focused on their goal, reaching the base of the path to the caves just as Vernon disappeared into the largest opening. A woman's scream echoed from within. Not Catherine's voice, but another's. They scrambled up the steep path, Ezra leading with the sure-footedness of his people, Gabe close behind despite his old wounds. They reached the cave entrance to find chaos within, Vernon holding a knife to an elderly woman's throat while using her as a shield, his young face twisted with a hatred that mimicked his uncle's. "Where are they?" he demanded, pressing the blade tighter against his hostage's neck. "Where's Catherine? Where's my traitorous cousin?" Ezra and Gabe entered silently, weapons raised but unable to risk a shot while Vernon held the woman, one of the Apache healers who had stayed to tend the sick children while the others evacuated. "Let her go, Vernon," Gabe said, his voice steady despite the fury evident in his eyes. "This is between Cole and us, not these people." Vernon's head snapped toward the sound, his expression shifting from surprise to malicious triumph. "Well, well, Uncle's going to be real happy when I bring him both of you." His gaze darted around the cave, noting the absence of those he sought. "Where are they hiding, Catherine and Skylar?" "Gone," Ezra stated flatly. "Beyond your reach. Now release the woman." Vernon's laugh held an edge of hysteria. "You think I'm stupid? The moment I let her go, you'll kill me." He pressed the knife harder, drawing a thin line of blood. "Drop your weapons, or she dies now." It was a standoff, neither side willing to yield, neither able to act without risking innocent lives. In the tense silence, none of them noticed the small figure that had emerged from a hidden alcove deeper in the cave, moving silently across the stone floor. Not until Skylar Hayes drove the small, bone-handled dagger Ezra had given her into Vernon Cole's leg. The boy screamed in pain and shock, his knife hand jerking away from the hostage's throat. Ezra moved instantly, tackling Vernon to the ground, while Gabe pulled Skylar and the healer to safety. Vernon fought like a cornered animal, slashing wildly with his knife, but Ezra's superior strength quickly subdued him. "Skylar!" Gabe's voice held equal measures of relief and anger. "You were supposed to be with the other children." The girl stood her ground, chin raised defiantly despite the trembling of her small body. "I came back to help," she said. "I couldn't leave Mama and you and Ezra to fight alone." Before Gabe could respond, a new voice spoke from the cave entrance, cold, controlled, and immediately recognizable. How touching. Judge Randall Cole stood framed against the fading daylight, revolver aimed steadily at Gabe's chest. Blood stained one sleeve of his black coat, but his hand remained perfectly steady, his pale eyes calculating as he surveyed the scene. "Let my nephew go," he ordered Ezra, "or I put a bullet through Hayes right now." Ezra's grip on Vernon tightened for a moment, then loosened. The boy scrambled away, limping to his uncle's side, hatred burning in his eyes as he glared at Skylar. "She stabbed me," he spat. "The little savage stabbed me." Cole ignored him, his attention fixed on the tableau before him. Gabe standing protectively in front of Skylar and the Apache healer, Ezra rising slowly to his feet, the quiet dignity of the cave with its sick children watching wide-eyed from the shadows. "Where is Catherine Hayes?" Cole demanded. "Tell me, and I might let the girl live." "You're lying," Skylar said before any adult could answer, her young voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "You won't let any of us live. You're a coward who lets others fight his battles. Cole's expression darkened at the child's defiance. Brave words from a traitor's daughter, he said coldly. Your mother will watch you die before I'm done. No, she won't. The new voice came from behind Cole. Catherine Hayes stood in the cave entrance, a rifle aimed squarely at the judge's back. Her face was calm, her hands steady despite the enormity of the moment. Lower your gun, Randall, she commanded. It's over. Cole didn't move, his revolver still trained on Gabe. It's never over, Catherine. Not while I draw breath. A strange smile touched his lips. You think you've won? My men are still out there. This little sanctuary will be ashes by morning. Your men are dead or captured, Catherine countered. The Apache control the canyon entrance now. Grey Wolf sent me to tell you you've lost. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Cole's face. But his gun hand remained steady, and when he spoke again, the cold calculation had returned to his voice. Then I have nothing left to lose, he said, finger tightening on the trigger. And neither do you. A shadow moved at the edge of the kin. Nara appeared silently behind Cole, her face set with the same determined focus she had worn while treating the gravely wounded at Hidden Springs. In her hand was a medicine pouch, but instead of healing herbs, she flung its contents, a blinding mixture of limestone powder and dried pepper, directly into Cole's eyes. The judge howled in pain, his aim faltering as he clawed at his face. In that critical moment, Catherine's rifle steadied, finding its mark. Everything happened at once. Cole swung his revolver toward Skylar, hatred replacing reason in his final act. Gabe lunged forward, placing his body between his daughter and the bullet. Ezra dove for Cole's legs, trying to disrupt his aim. But it was Catherine who fired first, her bullet striking Cole in the chest with unerring accuracy. The judge staggered, shock replacing hatred in his pale eyes as he fell backward. Vernon screamed, reaching for his uncle's fallen weapon, only to find Ezra's foot pinning his wrist to the stone floor. It's over, Ezra said quietly. Let it end here. In the sudden silence that followed, Catherine rushed to Skylar and Gabe, gathering them in her arms as if to reassure herself they were unharmed. Ezra secured Vernon, binding the boy's hands with a strip of leather while keeping a watchful eye on the dying judge. Cole's breathing grew labored, blood spreading across his shirt front in a dark stain. His eyes, already growing distant, found Catherine's face. You don't understand, he whispered. They took everything from me. My Mary, my boy. And you took everything from others in return, Catherine replied, no triumph in her voice, only a deep weariness. The cycle ends today, Randall. Cole's lips moved again, but no sound emerged. His eyes fixed on some distant point, perhaps seeing not the cave ceiling, but the faces of those he had lost so long ago. Then, with a final shuddering breath, Judge Randall Cole departed a world he had tried to reshape through violence and hatred. In the aftermath, as Catherine comforted Skylar, Nara knelt beside the fallen judge, checking his pulse with the clinical detachment of a healer. Finding none, she rose and faced Vernon, who cowered against the wall. I tended your uncle's victims for years, she said quietly. I could hate you for that alone. Vernon stared at her, fear and confusion warring in his young face. Why don't you? Because hate is what killed him, Nara replied, gesturing to Cole's body. And because my daughter will grow up in a world alongside yours. She glanced at Skylar, who stood protected in the circle of her parents' arms. They deserve better than our hatred. It was this moment, two mothers from opposing worlds, both choosing healing over vengeance, that truly marked the end of Cole's poison. As Ezra watched his wife move through the cave with the dignity of both warrior and healer, he understood that while he had been lost in grief, she had been forging a new path, one that might finally lead to peace. Vernon, watching his uncle's death, seemed to collapse in on himself, the bravado and cruelty draining away to reveal the lost boy beneath. What happens to me now? He asked, his voice small and uncertain. It was Skylar who answered, stepping forward despite her parents' protective hands. You live, she said simply, and you try to be better than he taught you to be. Grey Wolf entered the cave, assessing the scene with eyes that had witnessed too many cycles of violence. His gaze lingered on Vernon, the nephew of the man who had hunted his people for years. What shall we do with this one? He asked, addressing both Ezra and Gabe. Vernon remained kneeling, his eyes downcast, the knife wound in his leg still seeping blood. All the hatred seemed to have drained from him along with his uncle's life, leaving behind only a confused, frightened boy, barely 15 years old. Ezra studied Vernon for a long moment. He is young. The poison his uncle fed him can still be drawn out. He tried to kill us, Gabe reminded him, his hand still protectively on Skylar's shoulder. As I once tried to kill you, Ezra replied quietly. Hatred is taught, not born. Catherine knelt before Vernon, her healer's instinct overriding caution as she examined his leg wound. Two Hawks lost his family to Cole's raids, yet he found a way to honor his dead without becoming what he hated. Perhaps Vernon can learn the same. After a brief discussion, they decided Vernon would remain at Hidden Springs under Tala's watchful eye, where he would learn the truth about the people his uncle had demonized. The boy would work alongside those he had been taught to hate, helping rebuild what Cole had destroyed. Not as prisoner, but not yet as friend, something in between, with the chance to forge his own path away from his uncle's shadow. As Apache warriors led Vernon away, he looked back once at Skylar, confusion and something like gratitude warring in his expression. The journey ahead would not be easy, but like the canyon that sheltered them all, even the deepest wounds could in time give birth to new life. The profound wisdom in the child's words settled over the cave like a blanket, muffling the echoes of violence that had preceded it. Outside, the sounds of battle had faded, replaced by the calls of the victorious Apaches securing their sanctuary. Ezra moved to the cave entrance, looking out over the canyon that had sheltered his people, that had kept his family safe when he could not. In the gathering twilight, he saw a figure climbing the path toward the cave. Nara, moving with the grace he remembered, her face lifted toward him in a smile that bridged 3 years of separation. And behind her, no longer hiding in her mother's skirts, but running ahead with the boundless energy of childhood, came Luna, his daughter, live, growing, beautiful beyond words. Papa, she called, using the English word rather than the Apache, a small detail that spoke volumes about her life in his absence. Papa, we won! Ezra knelt, arms opening to receive the child he had thought forever lost. Luna crashed into him with the force of a small whirlwind, her thin arms wrapping around his neck, her face bearing against his chest. Nara joined them a moment later, her hand gentle on her husband's cheek, eyes brimming with tears of joy. The spirits brought you back to us, she whispered in Apache, just as I always believed they would. Inside the cave, Catherine watched this reunion with her own family gathered close, Gabe's arm around her shoulders, Skylar leaning against her side. The journey that had begun with a child's courage in cutting a condemned man free had come full circle, bringing healing where there had been only wounds, forging bonds where there had been only divisions. As night fell fully over Salvation Canyon, fires began to bloom along its floor, not the destructive flames of battle, but the warming hearths of celebration and remembrance. The dead would be honored, the living would heal, and tomorrow would bring the work of rebuilding and moving forward. But for tonight, in a cave halfway up the canyon wall, two families bound by circumstance and choice shared the simple miracle of survival and the profound gift of redemption. Outside, beneath a sky blazing with stars, the ancient land continued its patient existence, indifferent to the brief dramas of those who claimed its surface, yet somehow bearing witness to the enduring truth that had emerged from blood and ash. That hatred may build empires, but only love can build a home.